Okay, we are back on a little bit of a silly day that we're having over
We
here.
are.
Oh my gosh. Um, so I am Sita Severson, and
I'm Chloe Willard.
we are the podcast Vedic Wisdom Unfiltered. So it's funny because Chloe and I will talk for hours and just get so passionate about what's going on in the wellness world today and what's happening with our clients and things that we've run into, and we easily can get on our soapboxes together because we're like, and then and blah 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 and blah blah blah. And so we decided, like, hey, let's share this because we do have years and years and years of experience. And when you put both of our years of experience together, it's actually like, wait a second, we might actually have something somewhat intelligent to say in terms of our perspective. I mean, maybe, maybe not, but I happen to think so. Um, and one of the things that has really come up, um, well, this comes up a lot, but in particular over the last week, has been in a world right now where there is just so much fear, right? I mean, unfortunately, there is just the collective energy and the field of fear is just, I don't think there's a word that can quantify that. And the way that we're seeing that funnel into the wellness world, and how the wellness world in particular, unfortunately, knowingly or unknowingly, consciously or unconsciously, is actually feeding into these fears. And something that Chloe and I have seen a lot, and I'll even sometimes have to weed through my own psychology with this, are the shame based approaches to healing that we're seeing, or whether it's an approach, whether it's a practitioner, or whether it's just the collective saying key phrases or the trendy hype hashtag terms that really are just a result. All the result is fear, shame, self doubt, self loathing, all the things that actually make us sicker. And unfortunately, one of the driving forces, I think, for a lot of the reasons why we end up getting sick in the first place, not all the time, obviously, that there's so many reasons why we get sick. I mean, first of all, we're in the 3D plane. We're going to get sick. There's
Right?
karmic reasons. There's, there's like a million reasons why we get sick. It is not like, oh, you did something wrong and now you're getting sick. Because that is one of the big ones that drives me absolutely bonkers. But I can say that shame is one of the driving forces of illness for people, or why people struggle to heal, is the shame that they're not healing right, they're not doing right, and that can be a contributing factor to making people sicker, or just calcifying the energetics around not feeling like we're enough on some level. And I think not feeling like we're enough is a common thread that runs rampant among most of us humans on some level, or at the very least, there are those of us, and I'm sure we're in good company with our listeners as well, who have put in a lot of time and effort to feel and to really get that we are inherently enough just because we are. We're here, we're being, we're breathing. We were born into this realm, and that makes us enough just by its very nature. But unfortunately, there's so many approaches in the wellness, so-called wellness world now, that are telling us otherwise. It's almost like creating a market for itself in a way, right? It needs to have a voice. So it's like, it's almost like the lifeguard that pushes someone in the pool so that they have someone to save. It's like, that's what I imagine. So that's sort of my blah of my thoughts of this intro, because I know, like, Chloe, you and I are both so passionate about this because unfortunately it's everywhere. And even in the this westernized, colonized Ayurvedic system, and we're seeing that like crazy. So I would love to just hear what some of your initial thoughts are on that.
Oh my gosh, so much. So yeah, it's really funny how you mentioned like how we get on our soapbox because I mean it is like we get together and we talk and we're both so excited and we're both I mean we are both so passionate about helping people and and about bringing the approaches that are not shame based. And so we do get to see a lot of that contrast between how we work and then how kind of what I think is the mainstream approach in the wellness world is a lot of fear mongering and shame based approaches where people are really being um, given a lot of messages about how they're broken. I mean, I've seen so many memes on social media, Instagram, Facebook. I've seen TikTok videos. I don't know what those little short videos are on Facebook that come up in my feed, but whatever those are, I've seen so many of these, all these types of media now talking about literally saying this person's broken, that person's broken, and nobody's broken, right? So that first of all is a thing that I see a lot. And if we come to healing with that belief that we're somehow broken, then we think we need to be fixed. And there's the shame, right? Because we think we're broken or we're trying to shame someone else because we think they're broken. And so we can't, in the Ayurvedic perspective, we can't create healing from a belief in brokenness because healing's not even possible then. That we can't even cultivate a state of wholeness, right? From a state of brokenness. So we're saying that, in the Ayurveda, Sita, as you know, that we say you're whole already, that you're already whole, you're already healthy. And that healing is about reclaiming that which you already are, not about becoming something that you're not. And so for me, it's hard for my heart, I would say. It's sad for my heart to watch people struggle in that space of trying to control everything that they think is broken or wrong about them. And the Ayurvedic approach is offering a way to integrate all that we are without the shame. To say, here's everything that I am, and here's how everything that I am contributes to my state of wholeness and health. And that means everything about me that I think is wrong. So the healing isn't about fixing what we think is wrong, it's about realizing that it's not wrong in the first place.
Yeah, honestly, that is it's very well said. And I think too that when we look at the indigenous type of medicines or approaches across the board, what I also see is more of a, I don't know if I want to say matriarchal, but I want to say at least a more balanced approach in terms of, yeah, like matriarchal, patriarchal, where it's more integrated that way too. I feel that part of what has come into the wellness world and the way that we're speaking about it is really oriented towards these patriarchal paradigms that really pushed out the more feminine principle. And I don't necessarily like to speak in dualisms because that's a whole other show. But I'm using it for context in this conversation because when we look at I think the true essence of healing, what comes in from its very nature is sometimes, yes, nature can be harsh, right? The nature outside can obviously be harsh. And if we look at nature, though, for the different patterns that we work with within our own system, we can see that, yeah, some things are going to arise, but generally speaking, on a regular base, day-to-day basis, let's say, there are cycles for a reason. There is nurturing of particular balance of sun and shade and water and earth and air and all of these different things that trees and and vegetation, things like that, are planted where they are planted for a reason. It's because that's what's going to be the most nourishing for their temperament or what it is that they need. We are no different from that. And that is a very, dare I say, feminine or balanced approach, because I think it is inherently masculine and feminine. It's all the things. Again, I want to get out of dualism, but I'm trying to express this with some nuance, that what we're seeing a pattern in the wellness world is that being taken away. That's part of this whole sort of, unfortunately, like misogynistic, patriarchal crap that I would like to see be taken down personally, because once that's taken down, that's when we say there's space for everyone at the table, because that is truly what, again, these indigenous cultures always held space. Like, we take care of our people, we take care of our tribe. There's medicine for all, there's food for all. This is truly a place where we're all held, and what we bring to the table are our inherent gifts. We're not doing the things that we shouldn't be doing, air quotes, if you're listening. It's not that we don't have responsibilities, but there's a lot of forcing health, forcing ourselves to press on, forcing ourselves to aggressively take life on and tackle problems. And it's not using that's one approach. There is space for all. That is one approach. But what we're speaking into is, when it comes to the true nature of the teachings of Ayurveda, of Tantra, of Vedanta, of all of these glorious things that we have access to, what they will universally tell us is that when we bring who we truly are, the essence of who and what we truly are, to the altar of our lives, there is space and nurturing for it. And it is our sacred work on these journeys to have and create all of the elements necessary for the true essence of who we are to come to life. And that is health. That is the definition of health. And so this rah, 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 push through, like, don't do this, don't do that, is like, no, we've literally just violently killed and cut off at the knees the essential nature of these original teachings.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I come to mind for me as you're saying that is I think it's a lot about the head and the heart, that this approach to healing that comes from this shame-based avenue is very head oriented. It's not really heart centered, it's not body centered. So we are encouraged to basically live in our heads and decide in our heads what is health, what do we think health should look like for us, and we're given all of these frameworks about these ideals like perfect health, right? Which is, of course, an impossibility. And there's this thread of teaching in the Ayurvedic world that talks about perfect health. And how damaging is that? Because if we think of ourselves as beings who are chasing after the goal of perfect health, we're going to expect that we're doing things wrong if we don't achieve it. And then there's the shame, right? And then we chase and chase and chase after this goal of perfect health. We're never going to get there because perfection is an illusion. And because even if we get to that state of perfect health in a moment of time, we're dynamic beings living in a cyclical universe. So we're not going to stay there even if we get there. So if we're expecting to stay there, we're going to come back on ourselves and again think we're going to start shaming. We're going to shame other people because, oh, you must not have done your Ayurveda right because you're not in your state of perfect health. We're going to shame ourselves and say, oh, you must have done something wrong. What did you do wrong? Because you're not in your state of perfect health, right? And that's so messed up, I think, because it keeps us in this state where we're set up to fail because we can't succeed when we're chasing after something that's unattainable, right? And I think it does come from this idea that we create in our minds. Like, if I do everything right, and what is right anyway, but whatever I think is right, where that's what we're taught to believe in our minds. Like if I do everything that Ayurveda says is right, if I go by my perfect daily routine, everybody loves to talk about dinacharya in the modern world. And it means very different things in the traditional Ayurveda versus the westernized form. But everybody's talking about dinacharya, and like you get up at this time, you eat at this time, you poop at this time, you pee at this time, you drink your water at this time. It's like, really, what animal does that, right? Like look out in nature.
Yeah.
What animal does that? No animals do that. Even like you and I, Sita, both have dogs. They don't even do that. Like
I
they don't even live
wish.
on that
Look
kind
at
of
me.
schedule,
Oh my
right?
God, wouldn't that be amazing? Oh
It'd be
my
so nice
gosh.
if
Oh,
they were that consistent. But it's like if animals don't do that and they're living closer to the rhythms of nature than we are as humans, because they don't create all these mental structures for themselves. If they can't even do that, why would we think we could do that? It's so unreasonable. And yet, this is what a lot of people are encouraged to put on themselves structurally in the westernized Ayurvedic constructs. And we cannot expect ourselves as human beings living in a dynamic universe with families, with pets, with friends, with jobs. We're not in control of all this stuff. How do we really think that we could create any kind of structure that we could maintain day in and day out without fail? We can't do that. I mean, it's like we're trying to, it doesn't mesh. It doesn't mesh with reality
no. It's like
because,
saying there'd be no weather outside. That's
right. It's
basically
like,
what that's saying. Yeah.
exactly. It's like
Yeah.
you said, all of nature is cyclical. We're cyclical too. If we create a structure that doesn't honor that, of course, we're always going to be chasing something we can't achieve. And then we're going to be constantly shaming ourselves. I can't tell you how many people I get into consultation with in my private practice. And
Oh
they're
yeah.
telling me how frustrated they are with themselves that
Yeah.
they can't maintain this Ayurvedic schedule. And I'm like, well, that's because it's not an Ayurvedic schedule. Like Ayurveda
Yeah.
is the science of life. You can't create a science of life that violates the laws of nature and is fundamentally out of sync with the cycles of life. Those things don't go together.
Yeah. No, gosh, you've opened up two cans of worms for me.
That's my
One,
favorite hobby.
I know, right? But again, it's not worms, it's confetti. Nothing
That's
against
right.
worms, but confetti feels a lot more
Glitter.
exciting for me. Um, so, two things that came to mind when you were talking is just to share briefly about something like personal that I've been working with is for people who don't know. My husband and I had a yoga and wellness studio, which was the second can of confetti that I'll get to. Um, but we were going and going and going. Like, literally, I was working with all things considered in school. We have animals, we had a home, we had the business, all this stuff, about 80 hours a week. And even though I was super passionate and lit up with things, I knew I was exhausting myself. And what I really started to understand, again, I'll get more into this in can number two, that this wasn't the dream that I had wanted. And so I had to really stop and ask myself, like, what am I doing? And like, why am I doing this kind of thing? And so where that led me to is, well, we got rid of our home and we are living in a motor coach. We're mobile for the foreseeable future. But here's the thing, I used to be, I had a meditation practice every morning like clockwork because that I just fell into that like 20 some years ago. And I'd get up and I would do my meditation, just like 20, 30 minutes. I mean, sometimes longer if I felt called to, but that was my thing. And then I would feed the dogs and whatever else. The last few months, I'll get up and I'll feed the dogs. I may or may not meditate. And sometimes I just need to go back to bed. Midday right now, there are times where I'm like, I just have to take a nap. Like, I don't have any more in me right now. And so I have been having this opportunity of clearing so much of my schedule so that there's space for me to breathe when my my imbalanced inclination is to just find stuff and pack it in and stuff it in, where I've had to say, like, to myself, literally, like, no, like, keep the space, don't make any extra commitments right now, make sure the space for there is the space for self-care. And so I am napping when I normally wouldn't nap, or I would just take like a cat nap or do yoga nidra in the afternoon if I needed a boost, and then go on with my day. I've had a few days over the last few months, I have full on, I'm like, it's 2 in the afternoon, I am taking a nap for as long as I nap, and I don't know if I'm doing anything else when I get up. And I'm giving myself full permission to do that, right?
That's
But
awesome.
one of the things that I've been able to develop over time is this insane amount of self trust. And I think that that's also a big thing when we go to practitioners or we're looking at stuff like that we're talking about, is self trust. Because what I do know is, in reflection, many years ago when I started my meditation practice, it was because I was told, like, that's what you're supposed to do. So I did it for
Mm-hmm.
the very dogmatic reasons. And I'm not saying being disciplined with a meditation or some kind of practice is bad, not at all. But I know that my own motives of going into it were not what they are now. And so I have learned to trust that I will get back on track, whatever that looks like, right? Like lately I've been doing a puja at 7:30 at night, where and that's when it's like we spend 30 minutes and we do our chanting and we spend a few minutes meditating, and then that just takes us into like ease for the rest of our evening, and that is working really well for us right now. So that's part of that adaptability that you're talking about, and like the space for permission, that I think really is so important, because that means if we go to a practitioner or we're seeking healing in whatever way that we're seeking, we still have so much self agency that we can truly know somewhere within, whether we know it right away or not, but we can discern for ourselves, is this truly my path of healing? It might be someone else's path, but is it mine? Right? So I have my other can. I'm going to save that because I want to hear what you have to say, because I know that was a lot.
I love it. I love our little cans of confetti glitter. Like our favorite thing to do is open them up.
Yep.
Um, because the thing that I was thinking about, I mean, similarly to what you shared, I've had my own experiences with that, going to teachers and hearing them say, in a lot of the Ayurvedic world, it's really common for people to be telling folks, you got to get up at 4 a.m. And, they'll say, it's like, there's no consideration a lot of times. um, what is, what is otherwise going on in this person's life. Right. And so, my more traditional, my teachers more come from India and more very traditional lineages. So I haven't gotten, um, I'm just trying to think, have I gotten any of the westernized teaching? I don't think I have. Um, so my perspective tends to be very different, but I've noticed that I still, being in the Ayurveda world, I've attended, conferences and workshops and classes, and there are going to be people who are promoting that more westernized approach, and people coming into consultation with me and telling, what they've encountered and in books and whoever else, or wherever else. But the thing that I noticed is really different is that holistic perspective, where in the traditional way of applying the Ayurveda, we're taking into account these life stages that we're taught in the way of Vedic living. So we're talking about people's householder phase, people's forest dweller phase, and I'm just using the English because most people are going to be speaking English who are listening, but
Yep.
um, but you know I meet a lot of people who are in what's called their householder phase of life. And that's the phase of life where we have our own house, we have our own job, we have our own income, we have our own property. We're, having some kind of household structure, whatever our family looks like, whoever's involved, it doesn't matter if it's many people or you and one other person or you by yourself or you with animals, like whatever that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
But the householder phase has certain rhythms associated with it where we most likely need to get up and participate in some kind of job during the day to earn income. And then we have certain, deadlines and timelines that we are not in control of that we need to meet. Right. And so I find that these really dogmatic approaches, they're not compatible with this householder phase because they're actually trying to get people to maintain more of an ashram life, and they're not
Yeah.
in an ashram.
No.
And that's more of the forest dweller phase, where it's literally your earning time, your household time is done. You don't have your own property. You don't have your own income. Like your time in the world and participating in the world is done.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore you can go off into the forest and do all your spiritual practices all day. And that's when you're getting up at 4 a.m. and you're, up with the sun and doing all these things. But I find that a lot of people, because of this shame-based approach, right, they're taught that that's the way. Get up at 4, do these practices, like do your hour of yoga. I mean, people are told these things, like do an hour of yoga, do an hour of meditation.
It's
Like
more
if you
like
don't
the military.
yeah, it's like if you don't do an hour of meditation every day, it's not enough. And it's like, why? Because that kind of stuff is not compatible with a householder life. And most people who are coming to these practices and these, seeking this healing, they're householder people. They're in that householder phase. And it's not appropriate for them to be trying to force themselves to get up at 4 a.m. Like I meet people who they have little children, like they have babies, multiple babies at home, right? And this, random yoga teacher is telling them you got to get up at 4. Like if that person has been up until who knows how long in the night with their baby, and you're like, maybe they've slept 2 hours and you're telling them to get up at 4. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, no, their sadhana is their sleep. I mean, seriously.
Like, that's not health promoting. That's cruelty.
Yeah.
So it's like when we adhere to these dogmatic structures, we're not practicing Ayurveda. We're not, we are going into that shame-based place, and we're encouraging shame, because if we're holding up all these rigid structures as the ideal, then people are going to feel like they failed when they can't do it. And I think it's up to us, I mean, this is one of the reasons why, Sita and I decided to start talking about this stuff and have our podcast, is so people can really access these teachings that are more freeing. Because one of the healing goals of traditional Ayurveda is moksha, or liberation. And it means that it's freeing us from all of these rigid structures that we try to box ourselves into. And it's allowing us to trust ourselves and the wisdom of our bodies, and that does tie into agency, because, if we're sitting with somebody who's telling us you've got to get up at 4, and I've been in those, those seminars, I've been in those conferences, and I've heard people say that, it's like it just goes in one ear and out the other, because I know that, maybe someday I might get up at 4, but that's not for me in my lifestyle. That's not what I'm doing with my days. And, I already go to bed early enough as it is. Like, that's to get up at 5. Like if I got up at 4, I'd have to go to sleep at 6 in the evening. Like, when am I going to eat? When am I going to walk my dogs after work? And so I think we really do need to help people come back to their own agency and back to their own trust and self-permission, because I think it's okay. I think it's really healing for people to get that permission, sometimes from their practitioner. Like, you just need to hear somebody else say it. Yeah. So if anyone needs to hear people say it, we're here saying it, that
for sure,
it's really okay to trust yourself, that if you're sitting with somebody and they're telling you to do something that is completely out of sync with your rhythms and your life, it's okay to say no to that. And it's okay to do something different, no matter what that person's position is, because it is really important for us to trust ourselves. And like you said, Sita, there's a difference between trusting yourself and, being disciplined with your practice, or, there's a difference between being rigid and dogmatic and being disciplined, because being disciplined means sticking through, and I don't know what this word is that I'm trying to say, like, being consistent with the thing that you want to do, even when you don't feel like doing it, right? Yep. But because sometimes discipline for me is taking a break, taking a rest, because I know that that's what I need, and it's what my body's telling me I need. But being dogmatic would be, I don't take a break and I don't take a rest because something in my mind's rigid ideal says I shouldn't.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? And so I think that permission is so crucial that because to me, part of that releasing the shame-based approach is allowing ourselves to really trust the signs and signals of our bodies and get out of those ideals in our head that's like, this is what I should be doing,
Mm-hmm.
and then instead listen to like, what do I actually need right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what comes to my mind too when I listen to you is how much of life, this is like microcosm, but how much of life is like trusting the process too.
Yeah.
Because I know for some of us, myself included, there is no question that there are times in my life where I want nothing more than to be doing yoga and meditating all day. That is like the most glorious thing. And it's not realistic for me.
Yeah.
And like my schedule, can I create that space as my own little retreat every so often because I need to fill my cup in that way? 100%. And that doesn't mean that I need to go spend $10,000 and go to like this really grand place. I can literally do that staycation style in my own little area and just make sure I've really protected the space. That's not possible for everyone, but I think there is a way of being creative with that, where if that's the kind of nourishment that we need, then we need to protect that too. We just need to recognize that, like what you're talking about, if we're in the householder stage, it's not necessarily appropriate. Because one of the things that I see is that I've had numerous clients over the years, many really, I imagine you have as well, where they are so bent on adhering to these dogmatic practices that I'm watching the shame build up in another way. And that way is they don't feel like they're showing up as the parent they want to because they're
Right.
tired and they don't have time for this or that, or they're not showing up as the partner that they want to be because now they're starting to feel a gap because their partner is feeling a little bit like, where did you go? Like we've been creating this
Yeah.
life together and all of a sudden it feels like you've disappeared. And yet the person that, I'll say the client, has felt very justified because they're on this path and they're doing what they're supposed to do for this particular goal. And I'm not saying that I don't understand, because as someone who also feels very connected to my spirit and very connected to my sense of spiritual path, like many of us are, there is that drive to prioritize that in our lives. But I do think, because this, once again, this is a microcosm, macrocosm, when we look at holistic, unless we are ascetics who are off in an ashram somewhere and we've basically renounced the world, we have committed somewhere to others in some capacity, whether it's an animal, whether it's a partner, whether it's being able to pay for the roof over our heads and it's just our landlord, to an actual job, job, or maybe it's our
Right.
own clients. We do have commitments that we have to be able to show up for, and that is part of our sacred spiritual work as well. So this compartmentalization of, oh, I'm being spiritual when I'm meditating, and that's why this is all so important. Or like when I'm doing my nasya and I'm cleaning out all my orifices for 10 hours every morning, that's my spiritual practice. But over here is the rest of my life. It's like, nope, that's another pitfall that we have fallen into that has completely separated this whole process, where that's not part of the cycle. The cycle is that when we are in a certain rhythm and a certain time of our life, all of these things matter and all of them do need to be prioritized. And this is where I see another sort of branching off, because when we think, oh my gosh, all this stuff has to be prioritized, that's when we have this like choose your own adventure type of scenario where it's, okay, I'm going to overwhelm myself with that, and I can shame myself with that, and I can beat myself over the head with that, and I can get 4 hours of sleep so that I'm fully participating in everything that happens every single day. Or I can take this Ayurvedic approach that says, truly, it really, in Ayurveda, the word harmony, I think, is way better than the word balance that we tend to use in the Western world, because balance just brings too much tit for tat. It always has to be level. Whereas
Yeah.
harmony is saying, no, Harmony is nature. It is always seeking to find its rhythm, and that is the harmony. That's why it's almost like a sound, right? And so one day I may have to give more attention to my family. Another day I may be giving more attention to my animals and my sacred space that I want to keep clean. Another day I may need to have more attention on my work. Some days could feel overwhelming, and then I need to remember that I've got to double down on what needs to happen after that. So my sense of self and agency and natural rhythms can have the space to go back into that harmony. This is not like a drilling in. So there's all these little nuances, I feel, where shame can show up if we don't feel like we're showing up in the way that we think we're quote unquote supposed to be, because we've given way to these practices that we're being basically beaten with, rather than being invited into to see what truly resonates and what's really sustainable and going to help me see. Really quick, I want to say this last thing, like go the distance in a way, because one thing that I think people also forget is that Ayurveda isn't necessarily about healing. It heals when we need it to heal. What it really is targeting is long-term harmony, so that we don't get so out of balance that we have all of these things to heal. Does that mean we're not going to get sick or we're not going to go imbalanced? Of course not. That's not realistic. But the promise is that we will have more endurance to go the distance in a healthy, more vital way, healthy being more in harmony, and in a more vital way for a longer period of time in our lives without deteriorating, because we haven't driven ourselves too hard and we haven't burnt ourselves out. And so looking at life as a long-term thing, rather than I just got to get through the grind. It's back to the grind. It's back to the grind. That's that. Bringing that into the wellness space of all places feels like criminal to me.
Yeah, I completely agree, because I mean it really is like I think that thing that you just said about the long haul is so important, especially because as we're recording this, we're under this big influence of a Saturn retrograde, which lasts until November. And Saturn retrograde is all about cultivating the foundations that bless us in the long term. So it's really the perfect time to think, not really think from our heads, but reflect on our lives and see what is sustaining us in the long haul and what needs shifting so we can sustain ourselves in the long haul. And how the and this Saturn retrograde, just for people who don't know this science of Jyotish, which is medical astrology, is part of the Ayurvedic science. We look at the positions of the planets and energies that they bring to us as part of the influences in our environment. So in the Ayurvedic way of living, we're not only looking at the seasons and the things that are in our immediate physical surroundings, but we're also looking at the transits of the planets and what they're bringing to the table. So that's why I'm talking about it now. But it's just that idea, I think, of, I think there is a lot of shame that comes into that, not only with, like when we're thinking about Ayurveda as healing, then we do get wrapped up into that idea of perfect health and shame and what we should and shouldn't do. And I really think it's so important that you brought in relationships, because I do watch a lot of people struggle when they think that they should be adhering to a particular kind of rigid structure of self-care practices and spiritual, daily stuff, whatever that might be. And it's not compatible with their family rhythms. And like you said, their partner, I remember my teacher, Swami Tirtha, said this to me one time. And when I was talking to him about this topic, and he was like, I was talking to him about spouses, and like one spouse has this Ayurvedic, spiritual practice, and the other one doesn't. And he was like, so who cares? And
True wisdom right there.
Right, like that was the perfect teaching. It's like, and like to him, he's like, so who cares? It's not even an issue. Like, because the issue, and so we talked about it a little more, and what he was saying is the issue is not that one person has this Ayurvedic schedule and the other person doesn't. The issue is that the person who's adhering to the rigid structure thinks it's a problem. Like thinks their partner should be doing it. And it's like, well, if it's not for them, it's not for them. Who cares? But But I mean that there can be shame in that too. Like, well, my partner should be
For
doing this and I'm
sure.
doing this, so they should. And, if it's good for me, it's good for everybody. But it's like, we don't want to, I mean, it's one of the consequences I think of, like, there's so much involved in this shame-based stuff, which I know we're probably going to
Yeah,
revisit in other episodes
for
because there's
sure.
so much to unpack. But I think that is one of the big consequences, is that it can harm our close relationships when we go down that road, because we end up sacrificing our relationships a lot of times on this altar of dogma,
Hmm.
where we think, and it's not necessarily that we create these ideas for ourselves, but we're told this is the way it should be. And we believe, oh, this person of authority or this person I trust told me this thing. And so now, I need to make my life be like they said. And I think it's important for us to step back and just look at the bigger picture.
Hmm.
If anything is out of rhythm with the commitments we've made to our family and our jobs and our careers and our clients, or whatever our commitments and our agreements are, those agreements come first.
Yeah.
And so I think that is one of the things in this kind of shame-based approach to the wellness world, where we're kind of told it's okay to implode all of our relationships as
Or
long
make
as.
our relationships responsible for
Mhm.
what
Yeah,
we're being told that we have to do.
right, like they should make it so I can do this thing. And it's like, well, maybe that violates the agreement you made with them. Maybe
Yeah.
you need to have a conversation about that before
Yep.
you just tell them, you should watch the kids so I can do an hour of meditation. Like, well, if they didn't agree to that,
Yep.
that's really important to talk about. So I hope I'm making sense, but it's just so much, I think,
Yeah.
where it's important for us to really not just think about the dogma, but consider that holistic context. What are the agreements we have with the people
Hmm.
we love? And to understand that the rigidity of the structure, that's not what's most important. The dogma isn't what's most important, because that's not going to give us that harmony. It's,
Right.
to me, it's like a dance. It's not balanced like static state. It's like this constant adjustment that we're making. And so, we are in this Ayurvedic life. It is a cultivation of health. And to me, it's like a co-creation. So we're
Absolutely.
co-creating health with the rhythms of life, and we're altering what we're doing in those rhythms of life, but we can't create harmony if we're trying to impose a structure on a life that is fundamentally shifting.
Yeah, totally. It's the whole idea of power versus force, and I think everything is relational. And so I think the other thing that I want to say is, in terms of relationships, that, hopefully in a healthy relationship, or a relationship or relationships that are working towards health, if they're not there, is that they are also ever evolving. And so the agreements that maybe we made 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago,
Yeah.
we may need those to shift, because we are most likely not the same people that we were all those years ago. Neither are the people we're in relationship with. And so I do think that, in honor of our growth and in honor of supporting our relationships to grow as well and evolve and expand, as is the nature of life, to me that's part of health too, is making sure there's always space for expansion, because all of life expands. That's the nature of it. So making sure that we have moments of reassessment in those partnerships and in those relationships, like, hey, is this still working for you? Or, you know what, I'm noticing this about myself, and I just need to reflect this back to you, or I just need to talk about this. Like, how would it feel for you if I needed to start doing this every morning or every evening? Is there a way that maybe we can figure out how to work with this? Right? We're giving the space in our relationships to support us, because that's the other thing. It's not, we're not in an all or nothing conversation. And I don't think we can stress that enough when we're talking about things like Ayurveda, where it's
Yeah.
like, no, we are talking about a whole system. Your whole life and all of your relationships, consider it as an ecological system. And so it doesn't mean that we can't do the things that we feel like we're supposed to be doing for ourselves. Absolutely not. It is remembering, though, that all of these things have priority within our life ecosystem. And so there will be times of what in yoga we call svadhyaya, or like self reflection, where we need to say, like, yeah, I feel like I need an adjustment, even if we don't know what that is. I can't tell you how many times I have had to say to my husband, I know that I'm feeling a shift and it feels kind of messy, and I have no idea how to put my finger on what I need right now, but I'm just acknowledging that that's where I am. So if it seems like I'm doing things a little bit differently, you're right. I am right now trying to find my way through some stuff. And so I mean, I feel blessed to be in the relationship that I'm in where I can say that. I can call it and just say, yeah, it's just kind of messy, right? And if I need support, I know I can ask him, or he'll just ask if I need support. But I think always leaving space for those adjustments, and not feeling like we have to adhere to these agreements that we made 20 years ago, not abandoning them either. We honor them, but we honor them as a living, breathing commitment, a living, breathing aspect of our life ecosystem, not as this like stagnant, just bottom line that we always have to come back to. That's the other approach that, in my estimation, is where it's the launch pad for shame.
Yeah, totally. Because that's its own kind of dogma, right? If we
Yep.
create a rigid structure of agreements with anybody that we never revisit, then we're going to be operating on some kind of default patterns that we may have established decades ago
For
that don't
different
even fit who
reasons.
we or the other person are now.
Totally.
And so, yeah, I mean, definitely that leads to a lot of the shaming, because I've noticed that it's like when we don't question the structure, we don't revisit, we don't allow ourselves to be in that ever evolving dynamic way of life, then it does yield us. I mean, it leads us to have these rigid relationship contracts where it's like we even start to think I shouldn't even have to tell them. Right? So many people have said that to me,
Oh
right?
my,
Like,
yes.
shouldn't even have to tell them. They should just know that this is important to me. And it's like, well, no, actually, it's so
No.
important to communicate, right? So we can say, this is what I need now. Like maybe we hit a point where maybe we do need to have an hour of contemplation time every day. But if that's a need that we genuinely have, we're responsible for communicating that to the
Heck
people in our
yeah.
lives and
That's right.
figuring that out together. We're like
Yeah.
letting it conversation. And I think that one of the things that this shame based approach does is it makes us have this, it gives us these, when we have that rigid structure, this is how it should be. It's like we act like little dictators to the people in our lives sometimes and to ourselves.
Yep.
And we're like, oh, this is how it should be. So this is how it is. And we don't, we kind of jump over the part where we needed to have that conversation to edit the agreements,
Totally.
which is so important.
And it's so funny because even when I hear you say like some of what you just said, I could feel my internal self go like I start to clench and I start to feel restricted and I start to feel like ugh, like who wants that? I mean, I think that's one of the things. It's like really tune in to what makes you feel expansive. When you hear certain things, if it makes you collapse inside, you know that that's probably not it. And so again, if we look at life and we look at ourselves and relationships and and all of this desire to expand and to breathe and to have this beautiful pranic field, if you look and sense life from that perspective, the things that don't land that way and cause contraction or cause a feeling of limitation or cause a feeling of like just being stuck or like, whoa, somehow I just hit a wall, your intelligence is giving you information there. And I think we're so quick to just sort of mentally override that intelligence that we'll experience. I mean, I've had clients before where I've said, just say this sentence to yourself and just notice how it feels. And now say this sentence to yourself and notice how it feels. And it's like, if you even just practice something like that, the going back and forth, it's like, wow, it to me, it's such a great way of really resensitizing into the intelligence of the self, because you can feel how much life wants to grow. You can feel how much relationships want to grow, right? It's like it's all there.
I think that's a good thing to leave people with, is that tool, because it's really, I mean, as we're talking about, shame-based approaches, I think it's nice to maybe leave people with this tool to discern shame-based approaches, because I know that when I hear somebody promoting a shame-based wellness approach, I feel that contraction.
Yes.
And it's so interesting, because that was also one of the things that Swami Tirtha taught me, is to feel into, and the way he put it was, what gives you more energy and what gives you less energy. And the thing that gives you more energy is expansive. The thing that gives you less energy is contracting, and go towards the decision that gives you more energy and is expansive. And so I think for people to start practicing that as they're discerning their own aligned approaches is beneficial. So, everybody who's listening can have that little tip to start
Yeah.
practicing and feeling into that, because it is a way of bringing it back to your own body and trusting in your own wisdom, which is really the foundation of Ayurvedic life, is
Yep.
trusting in the wisdom of your body and not overriding it with
Yeah.
second guessing and, self gaslighting or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
It's the true practice of deeply being with the divinity within ourselves.
Yeah.
Because I think it's easy, it's part of the playing field here, that it's easy for us to forget and to start identifying as our ego selves or as our physical selves, which is a very important aspect. And I don't see that this part of me is less divine than any other part.
Right.
And there's experiences of varying degrees.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I lean into that level of intelligence and trusting myself, I start to truly realize it's a term that a lot of people will hear from the Eastern world, but that's self-realization, right? That deep knowing of the connection to this greater energy of which we are all a part of which we are never separate from. We can know that theoretically, like so many of us know this truth theoretically, that we're just basically the divine walking around in a cute little costume that we call a body, right? But that stays so theoretical in when we use the mind as our doorway to approach an experience of that, we're going to have a very hard time finding it. We're gonna Another animal thing where it's like a dog chasing its tail, right? Like on occasion you might get your tail and it's like a really good day and you've been a really good boy and you get a treat and then it's like done.
Yeah.
But when we can show up to life in a way like that, in this space of expansiveness and feeling into what truly gives us life and what is truly expansive for us, that is when we are living with awareness of our sacred nature and just how sacred everything that we do is. And I don't want anyone to use that as a measure of, well, that was less sacred because that was a really crappy choice that I just made back there, right?
Right.
Shame, 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 right? It's
Right.
like, no, no, recognize, like, okay, so I don't like the result that I got from that. I thought that I was going in one direction and it ended up feeling more contracted than what I thought or what I hoped. Did I override again, or was I guided somewhere and that's truly the way it was supposed to be? It's it takes us into that space of like, I am so intrinsically and intimately connected to this higher intelligence that I can suss that out and I can do it differently next time if that's what I choose. From that perspective, I've already made something that felt contractive life-giving.
Yeah, because it's that principle that we're taught in the Vedas, that everything is learned through experience. And that's how we develop the wisdom that we take from life to life, right? That when we think about it and we develop intelligence, and it's like we have information in our minds, we don't really understand it necessarily. We have to live it and experience it. So often, when we follow that expansive feeling and that expansive choice, we may get to a place of contraction, but that's the thing we needed to have the experience to develop some wisdom. And then it's like, oh, okay. And then there we are back at expansion after we develop the wisdom. So yeah, I think that trusting our process is so key to that, because we really can. It's okay for us to trust in our divine wisdom and just operate from the foundation of that being a given, which I
Yeah.
think is so important.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely essential. Absolutely
Uh-huh.
essential.
Are we
Okay.
done for today?
We're done for today. I know. I feel
We
like
did
we could
it.
keep talking because I didn't open that second can, but I'll do it another time.
Okay. It's going to go on the list.
Going on the list. I know it'll come up at some point because
We have a
it's
big
it's a
list.
it's a biggie. Yeah. So we'll get there. We'll get there. But are there any final words or any last things that you wanted to share, Chloe?
And nothing's coming up. I think, yeah, nothing comes out. What about
Okay.
you?
No, I think I feel complete. I will say though, if anyone does practice that exercise or it's new to them, I would love to hear back from you. We would
Yeah.
love feedback about how that was. What maybe were some of the experiences that you've had, or maybe you've had experiences in the past with that you feel like you want to share. We would love to hear about it. So you can certainly, if you have us on YouTube, you can comment there. And we do have our email that you can email us there. It's vedicwisdomunfiltered@gmail.com, which we're always available for suggestions, questions, comments. But we would love to hear your stories of your experience of self. So just know
Yes.
that we
Or
have open
even,
door. Yeah.
yeah, or even your experiences with shame-based healing and shame-based
Oh,
approaches. We'd love to hear
ah,
all of that too, and we
yes,
will
we
talk about
would.
it. Yes.
Yes.
Any
Yeah,
any all of these things we would love to hear for sure.
for sure. Absolutely.
All right.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. We will see you here in another 2 weeks. Take good
Absolutely.
care.
Bye for now. Lots of love.
Bye for now.